A $10 baseball card purchased at a suburban garage sale contained enough classified military intelligence to compromise every NATO missile installation in Western Europe. The seller had no idea what he was giving away. Neither did the buyer. Not yet. Spring of 1983 brought an unusual warmth to Albany, New York, but the political climate between the United States and the Soviet Union remained frozen in the most dangerous standoff since the Cuban Missile Crisis 20 years earlier. President Ronald Reagan had recently delivered his Evil Empire speech, calling the Soviet Union the focus of evil in the modern world, while Soviet General Secretary Yuri Andropov, a former KGB chairman, responded by placing Soviet nuclear forces on their highest alert level since the Second World War. The rhetoric escalated daily, with both superpowers deploying new intermediate-range nuclear missiles across Europe. Each side convinced the other was preparing for a first strike that would end civilization within 30 minutes of the launch order. American intelligence agencies operated under constant pressure to identify Soviet agents operating on United States soil, aware that hundreds of KGB operatives had infiltrated American institutions using cover identities that took years to establish and were nearly impossible to penetrate, without making catastrophic mistakes that would expose ongoing counterintelligence operations. Christopher Mitchell had spent 15 years building his collection of vintage baseball cards, a hobby that began when his father gave him a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card on his 8th birthday, and told him that patience and knowledge were more valuable than money when it came to finding treasures that other people overlooked. He worked as an insurance adjuster for a mid-size firm in downtown Albany, a job that paid enough to support his wife and 2 daughters while leaving him weekends free to drive through suburban neighborhoods looking for estate sales and garage sales where elderly widows sold their deceased husband's possessions without understanding their value. Mitchell had discovered remarkable finds over the years, including a complete set of 1933 Goody cards purchased for $50 from a woman who thought they were worthless pieces of cardboard her father had collected during the Depression. But he had never found anything as potentially valuable as the collection he discovered on Madison Avenue on the morning of April 9, 1983, when he pulled his station wagon to the curb in front of a modest 2-story house with a hand-painted sign reading, "Moving sale, everything must go," taped to the mailbox. The seller, an elderly man named Walter Brennan, who was relocating to Florida to live with his daughter, had arranged several cardboard boxes on folding tables in his driveway, each box filled with items that represented a lifetime of accumulated possessions he no longer wanted to transport across state lines. Mitchell immediately noticed the shoebox labeled "Baseball Cards, 1950s", sitting between a box of rusty tools and a collection of Reader's Digest magazines, and when he opened it, he found approximately 200 cards in varying conditions, including several high-value rookies from the 1952 and 1953 Topps sets. Brennan explained that he had purchased the cards at various garage sales himself over the past 5 years, assembling the collection without any particular system or expertise, just buying whatever looked interesting, and he was willing to sell the entire box for $10 because he needed to finish clearing the house before the moving truck arrived on Monday morning. Mitchell paid immediately, loaded the box into his car and drove home with his heart racing, already calculating that he had just purchased at least $3,000 worth of cards for less than the cost of lunch. Mitchell spent Saturday afternoon in his basement office, carefully removing each card from the shoebox and examining it under the fluorescent magnifying lamp he used for authentication, checking for signs of trimming, recoloring, or other alterations that would reduce value. He reached the Mickey Mantle 1952 card around 4 in the afternoon, noting that it appeared to be in exceptional condition with sharp corners and vibrant colors, and he decided to test it under his ultraviolet lamp to check for paper restoration, a common fraud technique where dealers bleached stains and then repainted the surface. The UV light revealed something unexpected. 3 tiny dark circles arranged in a triangular pattern near the bottom right corner of the card, each circle roughly the size of a pinhead, invisible under normal light, but appearing as solid black dots under ultraviolet radiation. Mitchell had never seen anything like it in 15 years of collecting, and his first thought was that someone had marked the card with a special pen to identify it, perhaps as part of an inventory system. But when he examined the other high-value cards under UV light, he found similar markings on 12 more cards, each with between 1 and 5 dots arranged in different patterns. The dots were too perfect, too uniform, too deliberately placed to be accidental marks or printer's defects. Mitchell retrieved the jeweler's loupe his father had given him and examined one of the dots at maximum magnification, and what he saw made his hands start shaking so badly that he had to set the card down on the table. The dot was not a dot at all, but rather a microdot, a photograph reduced to nearly microscopic size, and through the loupe he could see text and what appeared to be technical diagrams compressed into a space smaller than the period at the end of a sentence. He had read about microdots in spy novels and World War II histories, but he had never imagined he would find one in his own basement, hidden on a baseball card purchased at a garage sale in suburban Albany. Mitchell checked 3 more cards, and each one contained microdots with similar content, and when he finally accepted what he was looking at, he walked upstairs to the kitchen telephone and dialed the number for the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in Albany, though it was Saturday evening and he had no idea if anyone would answer. Someone answered on the 3rd ring. Special Agent Brian Carter arrived at Mitchell's house 90 minutes after the phone call, driving an unmarked sedan and wearing casual clothes that made him look like a neighbor stopping by for a weekend visit, though the bulge under his jacket and the way he scanned the street before approaching the front door revealed his training. Carter had worked counterintelligence for the FBI's Albany field office for 7 years, specializing in Soviet espionage cases, and he had investigated dozens of reports from concerned citizens who thought they had discovered evidence of enemy activity, most of which turned out to be misunderstandings or paranoid fantasies, fueled by Cold War anxiety and too many James Bond films. He expected this case to be another waste of time, probably some collector who had found printer's defects on vintage cards and convinced himself they were secret codes. But when Mitchell led him to the basement and showed him the microdots under the UV lamp and the jeweler's loupe, Carter's casual demeanor evaporated immediately. He asked Mitchell to stop touching the cards, pulled a pair of latex gloves from his pocket, and carefully placed each card with microdots into individual plastic evidence bags while using the kitchen telephone to request immediate support from the FBI's Technical Services Division in New York City. Speaking in careful code words that would mean nothing to anyone listening on the party line, but would trigger an emergency response protocol that had been established specifically for discoveries of this magnitude. The technical team arrived at 3 o'clock Sunday morning in a van disguised as a telephone company repair vehicle, bringing portable equipment that could photograph and analyze the microdots without damaging the cards or alerting anyone who might be watching the house. The lead technician, a specialist in Soviet intelligence tradecraft named Kevin Nelson, who had defected from East Germany in 1977 and now worked as a consultant for American intelligence agencies, examined the microdots for 20 minutes before confirming that they were genuine KGB products, created using a microdot camera system that the Soviets had perfected during the Second World War and continued to use because it was virtually undetectable without specialized equipment and training. Nelson photographed each microdot at extreme magnification, and as the images appeared on his portable development screen, the content became visible. Detailed technical specifications for NATO Pershing II missile installations in West Germany, including exact coordinates for launch sites, security protocols, maintenance schedules, and the radio frequencies used for command and control communications between missile batteries and the Supreme Allied Command Headquarters in Belgium. The information was current as of March 1983, updated within the past 6 weeks, and represented one of the most significant intelligence breaches in NATO history, the kind of information that could allow Soviet military planners to neutralize the entire Pershing deployment, with a single coordinated strike before the missiles could be launched in response to a Soviet invasion of Western Europe. Carter spent Sunday morning interviewing Mitchell about the garage sale, and Mitchell provided the address on Madison Avenue, where he had purchased the cards along with a description of Walter Brennan, the elderly seller who was moving to Florida. Carter sent 2 agents to Brennan's house, but they found it completely empty, with a for rent sign in the front yard and no indication that anyone had lived there recently. And when they checked with the property management company, They discovered that Walter Brennan did not exist. The identification documents he had used to rent the house were sophisticated forgeries, and the house had been rented for exactly 6 months, beginning in October 1982, with rent paid in advance, through cash delivered by courier. The garage sale had been a carefully orchestrated intelligence operation designed to transfer the microdot cards from one Soviet agent to another, using innocent American civilians as unwitting couriers, and the seller had disappeared as soon as the transfer was complete, probably leaving the country within hours of Mitchell's purchase. Carter expanded the investigation to identify everyone who had attended the garage sale, interviewing neighbors who had seen the event, and he discovered that at least 15 people had purchased items, which meant that other microdot cards might still be circulating through Albany in the hands of innocent collectors who had no idea what they possessed. The FBI established a task force by Monday morning, pulling agents from field offices across New York and New England to track down every person who had attended the Madison Avenue garage sale and recover any cards that might contain additional microdots. They worked carefully, using cover stories about a criminal investigation into stolen property to avoid alerting Soviet intelligence that their operation had been compromised. Knowing that if the KGB realized the microdot cards had been discovered, they would immediately shut down their entire network and evacuate their agents before the FBI could identify and arrest them. The task force recovered 37 additional cards over the next 4 days, finding them in the collections of retired accountants, school teachers, and blue-collar workers who had purchased them as casual investments or gifts for their children, and each card contained microdots with classified information ranging from troop movements in South Korea to the technical specifications for the new F-15 fighter jet that was being deployed to air bases across Europe. The investigation led agents to 3 other garage sales that had occurred in Albany during the previous 8 months, all organized by different sellers using forged identities, all involving baseball card collections, sold at suspiciously low prices, and all traced back to cards originally purchased from a single source, a sports memorabilia shop called Capital Collectibles that operated out of a small storefront near the State University of New York at Albany campus. Capital Collectibles was owned by a 42-year-old Ukrainian immigrant named Yuri Volkov, who had entered the United States in 1976 as a political refugee, claiming persecution by the Soviet government for his dissident activities, and who had built a reputation over 7 years as a knowledgeable dealer who specialized in vintage baseball cards and sports memorabilia from the 1940s and 50s. Volkov taught economics part-time at the university, published academic papers on Soviet agricultural policy, and appeared to be exactly what he claimed, a former Soviet citizen who had embraced American capitalism and democracy with genuine enthusiasm. The FBI placed him under 24-hour surveillance on Thursday, April 14th, watching his shop, his apartment, and his movements around campus, looking for any indication that he was aware of the investigation or preparing to flee. But Volkov maintained his normal routine without any signs of concern, opening his shop at 10 in the morning and closing at 6 in the evening, teaching 2 classes at the university, and spending his evenings at home alone, reading and watching television. On Friday afternoon, an FBI analyst reviewing Volkov's sales records from the past year made a discovery that changed everything. Volkov had sold a 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle card 3 weeks earlier to a collector in Boston named Joshua Perez. The card's serial number matched a gap in the sequence of cards recovered from the garage sale. According to the microdot pattern Nelson had identified, that card would contain the final piece of the intelligence package, the piece that made all the other information actionable. The card in Boston contained NATO nuclear launch authentication codes. Carter drove to Boston himself, leaving Albany at 7 o'clock Friday evening with 2 other agents in a car equipped with emergency lights hidden behind the front grille and a radio system that connected directly to FBI headquarters in Washington, where senior officials were now monitoring the case in real time and coordinating with the National Security Council about the implications of compromised nuclear authentication codes. The codes changed every 30 days according to a rotation system designed to prevent exactly this kind of breach. But the March codes would remain valid until midnight on April 30th, giving Soviet intelligence 16 more days to transmit the information to Moscow and potentially use it to simulate authorized American launch orders that could trigger a nuclear war through confusion and miscommunication, the nightmare scenario that military strategists had worried about since the first intercontinental ballistic missiles were deployed in the 1960s. Carter understood that recovering the Mantle card was no longer just about stopping espionage. It was about preventing a potential nuclear exchange that could kill hundreds of millions of people within hours if Soviet military commanders believed they were seeing an authentic American first strike and responded with their own launch orders before anyone could verify what was happening. Joshua Perez lived in a 3-story brownstone in Boston's Back Bay neighborhood, an affluent area where successful professionals lived in restored 19th-century buildings that had been converted into expensive condominiums. And according to FBI records, Perez worked as a corporate attorney for a downtown firm specializing in international trade law, earned approximately $150,000 per year, and had no criminal record or known connections to foreign intelligence services. He collected baseball cards as a hobby, focusing primarily on Mickey Mantle cards from the 1950s, and he had purchased the card from Volkov's shop during a business trip to Albany 3 weeks earlier, paying $1,200 in cash for what he believed was a legitimate investment in a rare collectible that would appreciate in value over time. The FBI had no evidence that Perez was anything other than an innocent victim of a Soviet intelligence operation, but Carter could not take chances, and when he arrived at Perez's building at 11:45 Friday night, he brought 6 additional agents as backup, positioning them at every exit, while he approached the front door with a search warrant that a federal judge had signed 90 minutes earlier based on national security grounds that would never be made public. Perez answered the door wearing a bathrobe and holding a glass of scotch, clearly confused about why federal agents were knocking on his door before midnight on a Friday, and Carter explained that he was investigating a fraud case involving counterfeit baseball cards and needed to examine Perez's recent purchases from Capital Collectibles in Albany. Perez cooperated immediately, inviting Carter into his study and retrieving a leather portfolio where he kept his most valuable cards in protective plastic sleeves, and he proudly displayed the Mickey Mantle card he had purchased 3 weeks earlier, explaining that he had been searching for this particular card in this condition for over 5 years and was thrilled to finally add it to his collection. Carter examined the card under a portable UV lamp, expecting to see the telltale microdots that would confirm this was the missing piece of the Soviet intelligence package, but the card was clean, showing no microdots or any other unusual markings, and when Carter asked Perez to confirm this was the exact card he had purchased from Volkov, Perez became defensive and insisted that of course it was the same card. He had kept it in his safe since the day he bought it, and he could prove the purchase with a receipt that Volkov had provided, showing the date, price, and card description. Carter felt his stomach drop as he realized what had happened. Volkov had sold Perez a legitimate card, a genuine 1952 Mickey Mantle, in excellent condition, worth exactly what Perez had paid for it, but somewhere between the shop and Perez's safe, either during the transaction itself or in the weeks that followed, Volkov or another Soviet agent had switched the real card for the microdot card, which meant the authentic intelligence card was still in circulation and could be anywhere. Carter asked Perez detailed questions about the purchase, trying to establish whether anyone else had handled the card or whether Perez had left it unattended at any point, and Perez explained that after buying the card, he had stopped for lunch at a diner on Route 9 before driving back to Boston, and while he was eating, he had left his briefcase in the car, locked but visible on the back seat, which gave anyone watching him a 30-minute window to break into the vehicle, switch the cards, and disappear before Perez returned. The FBI technical team arrived at Perez's building within an hour, bringing fingerprint equipment and forensic tools to examine the card for any evidence that might identify who had handled it or where it had been manufactured. But the analysis revealed nothing useful because the card had been handled by multiple collectors over the past 30 years, and any recent prints had been obscured by Perez's own handling. Carter returned to his car and radioed headquarters with the news that the card was not in Boston, which meant they had lost the trail and had no way to determine where the microdot card was now or who possessed it, and he recommended immediately arresting Volkov before he could alert his Soviet handlers that the operation had been compromised. FBI Director William Webster, who was monitoring the situation from Washington, approved the arrest, and at 3 o'clock Saturday morning, April 16th, 20 federal agents surrounded Capital Collectibles and Volkov's apartment simultaneously, prepared to execute search warrants and take him into custody for questioning under the Espionage Act of 1917, which carried a maximum penalty of death if the government could prove that his actions had aided a foreign enemy during wartime. They found both locations completely empty. No inventory, no records, no fingerprints. Volkov had cleared out everything during the 8 hours between Carter's departure for Boston and the arrest operation. The shop looked like it had never been occupied. His apartment contained no personal belongings, no photographs, no documents, nothing that could identify where he had gone or how he had known to run. The FBI discovered that Volkov had withdrawn $40,000 from his bank account at 4 o'clock Friday afternoon, closed the account, and disappeared into the late afternoon crowd in downtown Albany. The university confirmed he had not appeared for his Friday evening class. His car was found abandoned at the Albany International Airport parking lot. Passenger manifests showed no record of Yuri Volkov boarding any flight, which meant he was traveling under a different identity, possibly one of several backup identities the KGB would have provided for exactly this type of emergency evacuation. Carter stood in the empty shop at dawn, staring at the bare walls and dusty floor, understanding that he had just witnessed a ghost vanish. Somewhere in America, a baseball card with nuclear launch codes was moving toward a Soviet courier. They had less than 2 weeks to find it, and absolutely no idea where to look. The breakthrough came from Christopher Mitchell, not from federal agents or intelligence analysts with decades of experience hunting Soviet spies, and it came because Mitchell understood something about collectors that the FBI had overlooked in their focus on espionage tradecraft and counterintelligence protocols. On Sunday morning, April 17th, while Carter was coordinating a nationwide search for Volkov and expanding surveillance on every known Soviet diplomatic facility in the United States, Mitchell was sitting in his basement, reviewing the complete sales records from Capital Collectibles that the FBI had seized during their search of the empty shop, and he noticed a pattern in the data that made no sense from a business perspective, but made perfect sense if the shop was actually an intelligence front using card sales as a cover for espionage communications. Volkov had sold 1952 Topps Mickey Mantle cards to exactly 7 customers over the past 18 months, always selling them at prices significantly below market value, always to buyers who lived in different cities across the northeastern United States, and always spacing the sales exactly 6 weeks apart, which created a predictable rhythm that would allow Soviet couriers to plan their collection routes without needing direct communication with Volkov that might be intercepted. By American counterintelligence, Mitchell called Carter and explained that collectors never sell high-value mantle cards below market price unless they are desperate for cash or unless they are running a scam, and Volkov was clearly not desperate because his shop was profitable and his university salary was comfortable, which meant the below-market sales were deliberate signals marking which cards contained intelligence materials that needed to be recovered by Soviet agents. Carter pulled the records and identified all 7 buyers, and when FBI analysts cross-referenced their names with surveillance databases and travel records, they discovered that 6 of the 7 buyers had been approached within 2 weeks of their purchases by individuals claiming to represent authentication services or insurance companies, offering to examine their valuable cards for free as part of promotional campaigns. And in each case, the buyer had allowed the supposed expert to take the card to a back room or vehicle for examination, creating opportunities for the microdot card to be photographed or switched for a duplicate while the buyer waited. The 7th buyer, a retired machinist named Robert Hayes who lived in Hartford, Connecticut, had purchased his mantle card from Volkov on March 4, 1983, exactly 5 weeks before Joshua Perez bought his card in Albany, and according to phone records, Hayes had recently contacted several card dealers asking about authentication services, which suggested he had not yet been approached by Soviet couriers and might still possess the original microdot card. Carter assembled a team and drove to Hartford, arriving at Hayes's modest suburban home at 2 o'clock Sunday afternoon, with a cover story about investigating counterfeit cards and a portable UV lamp hidden in his briefcase. Hayes was a widower in his early 70s who had started collecting baseball cards as a way to fill his time after retiring from Pratt & Whitney, where he had worked as a precision machinist for 41 years, building components for military jet engines, and he welcomed Carter into his living room with genuine enthusiasm, eager to show his collection to someone who appreciated the hobby. He retrieved the Mantle card from a safe in his bedroom, explaining that it was the centerpiece of his collection and represented the fulfillment of a childhood dream to own one of the most iconic cards in baseball history. And when Carter examined it under the UV lamp, the 3 microdots appeared exactly where Kevin Nelson had predicted they would be based on the pattern from the other recovered cards. Carter felt a wave of relief so intense that he had to sit down, but he maintained his composure and told Hayes that the card might be counterfeit and needed to be examined by FBI experts in Washington, and Hayes reluctantly agreed to surrender it temporarily, making Carter promise to return it within a week if the authentication proved it was genuine. Carter drove back to Albany with the card secured in an evidence bag, and by Monday morning, Nelson had photographed the microdots and confirmed they contained current NATO nuclear launch authentication codes valid through April 30th, exactly as intelligence analysts had feared. The FBI expanded the investigation based on information extracted from the recovered microdots, which included not just military intelligence, but also coded references to other Soviet agents operating in the United States using similar tradecraft methods. And over the next 8 months, the Bureau identified and arrested 17 KGB officers and their American accomplices who had been running espionage operations disguised as legitimate businesses, including antique shops, bookstores, and hobby shops across the northeastern corridor from Boston to Washington. The network had operated continuously since 1971, moving classified intelligence from American sources to Soviet couriers using everyday commercial transactions that generated no suspicion because they appeared completely normal to anyone watching, and the baseball card operation was just one component of a sophisticated system that had compromised dozens of military and intelligence secrets over 12 years without being detected by American counterintelligence. The arrests dismantled the entire network, but Yuri Volkov was never found, despite an international manhunt that placed him on the FBI's most wanted list and offered a $50,000 reward for information leading to his capture. The case remained officially open for 21 years, with periodic reviews whenever new intelligence suggested Volkov might have surfaced somewhere under a different identity, but no confirmed sightings were ever documented, and most investigators assumed he had died in the Soviet Union sometime during the 1990s, after the collapse of the communist government ended the Cold War that had defined his entire career. Then in 2004, a former KGB archivist named Vasily Mitrokhin published a comprehensive history of Soviet intelligence operations in the West, based on files he had secretly copied before defecting to Britain in 1992, and buried in the appendices was a brief biographical entry about a decorated intelligence officer named Yaroslav Morozov, who had operated under the cover identity Yuri Volkov in the United States from 1976 to 1983, running what Mitrokhin described as one of the most successful long-term espionage networks in KGB history. According to the files, Morozov had returned to Moscow in April 1983 after being warned by a source inside American law enforcement that his network was under investigation, and he spent the remainder of his career training new intelligence officers at the KGB Academy before retiring in 1991 with full honors and a state pension. He died of heart failure in Moscow in 1998 at age 57, never having faced prosecution for his crimes against the United States. Christopher Mitchell received a commendation letter from FBI Director Webster in May 1983, thanking him for his crucial assistance in dismantling a major Soviet espionage operation, though the letter could not specify details because the entire case remained classified under national security protocols. Mitchell continued collecting baseball cards for another 20 years, but he never attended another garage sale, and he eventually sold his entire collection in 2003 for $230,000, using the proceeds to establish a college fund for his grandchildren. Brian Carter was promoted to Assistant Special Agent in charge of the Albany Field Office in 1984, and later transferred to the FBI's Counterintelligence Division at headquarters in Washington, where he spent the final 12 years of his career hunting Russian intelligence officers who continued operating in the United States after the Cold War officially ended. He retired in 2006 and wrote a memoir about his experiences that was published in heavily redacted form, with an entire chapter devoted to the baseball card case that he described as the strangest and most consequential investigation of his career. Robert Hayes received his Mickey Mantle card back in May 1983 after FBI technicians created a perfect duplicate without the microdots, and he never learned that the card had contained nuclear launch codes or that he had been part of an espionage operation that nearly triggered World War III. He died peacefully in his sleep in 2009 at age 94, with the card still displayed in a frame above his television.